No one is talking about this. When it comes to the Islanders and the upcoming draft, which I am so excited is this week, there's so much talk about them drafting either a high impact forward or a right handed defenseman. Rightfully so. Those are the two biggest needs for the team. But there is a very decent chance that the top player available might be a left handed defenseman when the Islanders come to the podium, or I guess it's still in line when they call up whoever's at the podium. And I don't think the Islanders should be afraid to draft that player. And that player is Malte Gustafsson. I'll explain why on this episode of Islanders Digest. And I'd love to hear your take on this. And this is going to be the last prospect I really focus on in this mini series type thing that I'm doing. So if there's any prospects I have not talked about that you want to hear me talk about, be sure to let me know about them in the comments below. I will do an extra video kind of going through different guys because I think there is a chance the Islanders do trade for another pick, especially if there's a Pelech trade, something like that. I will kind of give a broad scope of the players who go after this range that the Islanders are in. I'm not going to focus on the range too much before because I think at the Islanders, even if they trade up, I think going to be trading up for one of these players that we've already discussed. But with that, let's dive right in. And first, this video is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the #1 sports pick app in the United States. You can download it using the link in the description below. And when you do, be sure to use code DIGEST. When you play $5, you'll get $50 instantly in lineups. I have some picks for you guys at the end of this video, but let's dive right into Malte Gustafsson, who I will not lie, at the start of doing my research, I was really iffy on the idea of picking a left-hand defenseman. He's kind of became one of my favorites. I will prefer, like looking at like the range, I would prefer a Teenan Lawrence or a Wyatt Cullen. As you guys know, those are my favorites. I love an Ethan Belchetz, a Daxton Rudolph, but I think Malte Gustafsson is pretty close in that conversation, and we'll explain why on this. Also, the reason we haven't talked that much about Viggo Bjork is because I just can't see him falling. Actually, you know what? Now that Ottawa has that pick, we'll touch about this just a moment. That does kind of change things. I think I will also do one on Viggo Bjork, so don't worry about that. But for now, let's dive into Malte Gustafsson, who, in terms of a profile for a player, this player's profile is incredible. You have a 6'4" defenseman who's 200 pounds, and typically with that profile, the big flaw is you're typically talking about, well, he skates okay for his size, but skating is concerned. Malte Gustafsson is a beautiful skater, and we're not talking just about going down the rink and coming back. He's a very agile skater, and right away, these are the types of things that you're looking for in a bona fide top 4 defenseman. And while I don't think he has some insane offensive potential, when it comes to the Islanders and defensemen you're looking for, you're not really focused on offense here. Yes, you do want offense, and I think Malte Gustafsson can really facilitate offense on the rush because of his skating, because also, if you watch him play, he is a very smooth passer. Just doesn't have those electric skills once you get in the zone, but especially in the Swedish junior leagues, he did have a really impressive season this year before he moved up to the SHL, which is incredibly impressive and something that I think is important to note. Malte Gustafsson played against professional players this year. He played against men similar to what Victor Eklund did. The points were not all that high, but it's very impressive that he played at that level. And it also means, like, unlike a lot of defensemen, when you're talking about 3 or 4 years to come to the NHL and then you see what they have, with Malte Gustafsson, I think this is looking like a situation where he plays one more year in the SHL or even comes over to play in the AHL. After that, he kind of plays like another half a season before in the AHL, if not already in the NHL, before making pros. This is looking like a 2-year transition type thing for Malte Gustafsson because of those skills, because the skating's so good. And when you watch him play, he's such a good defenseman in terms of thinking and kind of attacking players. He's got some physical grit to his game, so he's not a big soft giant. He can play the body, but he is a very controlled defenseman. Perhaps not totally refined yet in the defensive zone, but it's clear looking at the level he was playing at that he is going to get there. So a lot of exciting things when it comes to Malte Gustafsson. I think this is a guy who, if he's on the Islanders, I think this is the guy you end up playing with Matthew Schaefer as his partner. Now, this is controversial. if you're drafting Malte Gustafsson, when you consider who the Islanders already have in the system, between Kashawn Aitchison, Xavier Value, you have players such as Isaiah George, Alexander Romanov still on the team for the next 8 years. When you put that together, this is a player that likely makes it so if you draft him, you're moving Schaefer to the right side. And the reason I bring up Schaefer is a lot of people are against that idea. They think it'll ruin him for some reason. I want to point out when you look at defensemen who play their offside, it's typically players like Schaefer, and they don't do it because they have to. Well, in a lot of situations, they do because there's not enough left-hand defensemen on their team. But offensively, playing on your offside is a clear advantage. In fact, we saw this with Noah Dobson, where he produced more points when he was playing on his offside. That kind of contributed to his 70-point season that one year, where he just felt more comfortable playing on that side. What you get as an advantage when you play your offside is your stick is closer to the front of the net. It opens up more one-time opportunities, and for players skating with the puck and who's skating on the rush, it puts you more of a natural position where you're in a shooting position when you enter the zone. The issue with playing your offside is when it comes to chipping the puck, things like that, it can be a bit more challenging. When you look at a profile like Schaefer, this is not the type of player that's going to bother. We already saw a glimpse of him playing on the right side. He looked absolutely fine. And for people who are still uncertain, when you remember who Schaefer's draft comparable was, before we had any idea of what we were going to get, and I think he's already surpassed his draft comparable, but this is a good kind of point to really emphasize what I'm saying. It was Miro Heiskanen. Miro Heiskanen, a great skater, good two-way player, not as offensively prolific as Matthew Schaefer. But you look at Miro Heiskanen and look where he's played for the majority of his NHL career. After his rookie season, he moved to the right side where he's very impactful for the Dallas Stars. He plays that right very well. I think the same can be true for Matthew Schaefer. And while it would not be my first choice, if I got to pick a bunch of equal players to see who the Islanders can get, because they're picking 13th, and this is considered to be a draft that's 13 or 14 players deep before there's a big step back, if that player is Malte Gustafsson, I say don't think about pick him. Even if it doesn't work with Matthew Schaefer, say he struggles to play the right side, you still have other defensemen you can try on that side. First of all, Malte Gustafsson is also a very good skater. There's a chance he could play the right side. There's a chance that Kashawn Aitchison can play the right side. He's a player who has a really good shot. It would be a really interesting experiment to see if he can play his offside. He's less mobile, but I think he's getting there with his work. This is not an issue I think the Islanders should worry about right now. And again, as somebody pointed out in one of these videos recently, you don't know if everybody's going to hit. You don't know what the future of the Islanders is going to look like. If you can get a guy who you think is guaranteed to be a top four defense, who can play on your first pair with Matthew Schaefer, and with Malte Gustafsson, what I love about him is perhaps the ceiling isn't as crazy as guys like Keaton Verhoff, guys like Carson Carrolls. I think he's one of the most projectable defensemen in this draft. If the Islanders can get that player, I would be thrilled. And you move on, and now you know your defense is absolutely set. And when you look for a team to have an identity, if you have a defense of Matthew Schaefer, Kashawn Aitchison, Malte Gustafsson, Alexander Romanov, you throw in players like George there, you're pretty set in that position. And sure, you need to eventually find a right-hand defenseman, but then if you have that kind of core on defense, it kind of really sets the time on Adam Pelech. When you trade him, that's where you look for a young right-hand defenseman, and you just complete that defensive core. It would leave questions in the forward core, but I would be very comfortable making the pick for Malte Gustafsson. Some people are afraid of picking Malte Gustafsson. I really embrace it. We'll see what happens. Looking at the list of players, it just depends on how the list falls. For example, right here, it has Malte Gustafsson going at 10 to Nashville. The way this draft's kind of really foreshadowed, the way it's going to go is either a team ahead of the Islanders is going to pick Malte Gustafsson, guaranteeing one of the players that plays a position the Islanders like will kind of slip down to them, or Malte Gustafsson's going to be the player available. And one thing I will say, this mock, it is not the best mock. This mock has Ryan Lynn going to the Islanders. Ryan Lynn does play the right side of the defense. I like Ryan Lynn's game. I really think he's kind of similar to Malte Gustafsson. I mean, I think there's more offensive upside, but in terms of what he can be in the NHL, I think it's similar. The difference with Malte Gustafsson is I don't have any questions. I have questions with Lynn. And I really, we'll see what happens. I don't know if you should feel comfortable taking the questions on with Lynn in terms of the size, in terms of what he's going to be, if you don't have to, if you can just draft Malte Gustafsson. Looking at this profile, I have to be honest, The only questions I have with this player is, well, he plays the left side. And when you're starting a conversation on whether or not you should draft a player based on just what sided handedness they are, that means you have a really strong player. And yes, you want to see more production, but when you watch this player play, it's very clear looking at his clips that he's got it. He is going to be a very good defenseman for a very long time. And I would be very open to the Islanders drafting this play and just figuring out the rest as you go. Now, obviously, I've made it clear at this point, Wyatt Cullen and Tina Lawrence are my favorites. Hopefully, I say hopefully as if I don't want this player. Hopefully, I think a team like Nashville or St. Louis picks Malte Gustafsson. Just so you know, if this gets to the Devils, they will not pick Malte Gustafsson. They have a ton of left-handed defensemen. They need big forward help. They might pick Oscar Hemming instead of a player like Ethan Belchetz. Honestly, Ottawa does increase the chances that Malte Gustafsson ends up falling to being the player that falls to the Islanders, just because I thought Florida, if Albert Smits was not available, would guaranteedly pick Malte Gustafsson. Now that he's not going to be there, and more importantly, Ottawa is a team that just locked Brady Tkachuk, I think it's a lock if they pick Ethan Belchetz. We will see what happens. This is going to be really interesting. I wouldn't be surprised too. We might see a situation where Ottawa trades this pick to, say, Toronto for Matthew Nyes, where there's just a completely different team picking there. Maybe it's even St. Louis. That can get really interesting. We will see what happens, but just know, if it gets to the point where Malte Gustafsson's there and all the guys that we talk about in previous videos are no longer available, I really hope the Islanders pick Malte Gustafsson. And if they don't, I think this is a player, last point here, who's very valuable, where other teams behind the Islanders are going to be looking at him and maybe be willing to trade up. In particular, a team like the Kings, who's looking old and not so good, they might see Malte Gustafsson as a player who can help them sooner and really help them in a position where, let's face it, after signing some of the horrendous defensemen they signed, they're going to need some young, cheap defensive help soon. Looking at their roster, it's a disaster. So that could be a situation where maybe you pick up an additional second round late pick, something like that, and then you end up picking a player like Klepov, like Novotny. I wouldn't hate that either, but I think if you pick another player instead of Gustafsson, just because you don't want to pick that defense, I think you're leaving value on the table. So the way I feel is either you pick one of the players we talked about, or you trade back. I would, as we talked about before, I would really hate if they pick a Novotny at 13 when he's a guy that you can get closer to 16, 17. But that's going to do it for this episode of Islanders Digest. Be sure, if you haven't already, to download Prize Picks using the link in the description below. Again, when you play $5, you get $50 instantly in lineups. I actually used one of my lineups. I'm going with less for both players in this upcoming fight, Conor McGregor and Max Holloway. I mentioned it before. I just really feel like this fight is not going to last all that long for different reasons. So I feel pretty good about that. But that's new for this episode. And let me know what you think about Malte Gustafsson. I think this is going to be one of the most controversial ones because of the position. I get it. The Islanders are absolutely stacked on the left side of the defense. It's getting ridiculous at this point. But if that's the best player by a bet or the wide margin, don't leave talent on the board, because then you'll just feel sorry when in a couple of years Malte Gustafsson is a top pair defenseman, if that is what he becomes, and then you pick a player like Klepov, who's the starting forward of your AHL team. Not saying that's exactly what Klepov's gonna be. I'm actually kind of turning around on Klepov, so maybe we'll talk about him soon. These videos keep on getting longer. I gotta shorten back up, but that's gonna do it for this episode. And yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts. Let's go Islanders! Cannot wait for this draft.